right, so let's dive into our message for today. Stories worth telling, talking about Nehemiah. Most of the stories that we've told up to this point were either before or during, like last week when we talked about they were taking possession of the promised land. So either before the Israelites went to the promised land, or while they were taking the promised land. We're fast forwarding now many, many years after they've been in the promised land. They made a huge mess of things. All kinds of stuff went down. And now God used foreign armies to come and displace them once again and take them captive to a foreign nation. And so they first went to a place called Babylon. And then while they're in Babylon, the king of Persia comes and conquers Babylon. And so now Nehemiah is serving the king of Persia. And so like this is the second country that has taken captive of the Israelites away from the promised land that God had given them. And why are they in this predicament? Because they did not follow the word of the Lord. They didn't stay faithful to God's commands. And God got fed up with it. And so this is what happened. And so Israel made a mess of what God had given them. And guess what? We've done the same thing. We've all been given just so much grace and so much life and so much mercy from God. And we take these gifts and every single one of us, we're born with this tendency to just mess it all up. And so they're taken captive to Babylon. And guess what? We are held captive by our sinful nature. Because without Jesus, we are a slave to sin. We're a slave to doing the right thing. The most deceitful lie in our culture today is that human beings are basically good. That's not scriptural. Scripture actually tells us that we are evil, that we have hearts that are full of wickedness, that there's nothing good in us. And it's only through the shed blood of Jesus Christ and what he did for us on the cross that we can step out of that and step into freedom. And so just like the Israelites, we are captive, not to a foreign king, but to our own sinful nature. And so there's a lot of parallels that we could see in our lives with where the Israelites are at in this story. And so this guy named Nehemiah, he was a cupbearer. He was a cupbearer. He handed the king his drinks, right? Not a necessarily fancy job, but he was in close proximity to the king, which is kind of cool. He got to be in the nice places. He got to be around the table with the nice food. Maybe he even got some of the scraps, and maybe he got to live a lifestyle that was a little bit better than other people, but nevertheless, he held a cup, right? And so Nehemiah, at one point, he heard about the state of Jerusalem. Now, mind you, he had never been there. He had never seen it. He was born in captivity, grew up in captivity, but he knew that he was a Jew. He was an Israelite. And so he heard about the state of his hometown, that the walls were in ruins, that the people were just miserable. And guess what? It broke his heart. And you and I, we have these moments where we just look around and we're like, things are not as they should be. I'm not where I should be. So we have these moments in our life where we sense a void, we sense a hole, something is lacking, and our hearts just break. And so as we look at this story, I just want you to see all these connections that in Nehemiah, it's physical brokenness. Like there's a physical city with broken down walls, but in your life and mine, there's spiritual brokenness and there's spiritual captivity. And we'll see the Israelites in this story moving from rebellion to surrender. And we'll see walls being rebuilt and lives being put back together. And it's an amazing thing. And it should be a picture to you and me of how God gives second chances. And we also see that God can do amazing things through people. Because Nehemiah, he wasn't just a cupbearer. He wasn't just a builder. He wasn't just a leader or a visionary. His life held so much more than that. We're also going to talk about the untold lesson of Nehemiah, that it's not just about the highlights, it's about the lifetime. It's about your whole life. And so, number one, let's look at the first thing we see in the story of Nehemiah. We see that Nehemiah's heart woke up. His heart woke up. I'm sure that you know how this feels to be going about life, the routine, day after day, and things are just normal. And things are just going, and you're doing what you have to do, and maybe you feel like you didn't even have a lot of choice about what you do in life. This is just where you ended up. And Nehemiah could probably say the same thing. He was born in captivity. He grew up. He's this cupbearer. It's like, what could really be different in life? But then the weight of the situation hit him like a ton of bricks. And remember, he'd never even seen or been to Jerusalem, and his heart is breaking for somewhere that he has never been to and never seen. And I just want you to know that God is still doing this in the lives of people today. That God can break your heart for what breaks his, and even in places that you've never even seen or never been. I love to tell my dad's story sometimes, and he can tell it better, but at one point, he was a minister of the gospel in southern Missouri, doing lots of great things, but he had a vision. He had a vision that he was standing before a crowd of Asian faces. And it was this dream, it was this vision, but it was vivid as life itself. And fast forward a few years, he goes as a missionary to the Philippines, and he learns their language, Tagalog. And next thing you know, he's standing in real life before a crowd of Asian faces and preaching in their language. And boom, God reminds him of the vision and the dream that he had had years before, and he was literally living it out in real time, in real life. Isn't that cool? It's amazing. God gave Nehemiah a vision of walls that were not broken, a city that was not in ruins, and a people who were no longer disgraced. And so when you look at Nehemiah's story, you've got to ask yourself, God, what am I seeing? What is going on in my life? What kind of visions do you want to put in my heart? What do you want my heart to break for that you want me personally to be a part of the solution? That should be a part of our prayers. And so Nehemiah 1:4 says, when I heard this, and this is Nehemiah speaking, I sat down and wept. In fact, for days I mourned and fasted and prayed to the God of heaven. So this wasn't just a one little flittering moment in a service, maybe during worship, when it's like, oh, I think I felt the presence of God there for a second. And it wasn't just, oh, man, Pastor Joe, your message really blessed me today, but then you walk out the doors and don't do anything with it, and life just goes back to normal. No, this wrecked him. And he couldn't get past it, and he couldn't just go on with life like nothing ever happened before. He had a moment that changed his life forever. And as your pastor, I would just beg you to believe that God can do the same for you. And this doesn't sound fun, weeping and mourning and fasting for days and being heartbroken. It's like I don't necessarily want that. But that's how the best things that God can do in your life start. And so if you're just going through the motions, you should be begging God, God, give me a vision that breaks my heart for the things that breaks yours. Because it's going to take you on the best journey of your life. You know, a lot of people ask the question, and I was just in a young adult group with Sobe Thursday night. They call it the Mat here at church. It was awesome. Multiple students asked questions like, how do I know it's God's voice? How do I know that God is the one that's leading me? How do I know? How do I discern God's voice from just my own feelings and my own thoughts? And by the way, those are amazing questions. Amazing questions. So how do you know? Well, it aligns with his plan, which we see in Scripture. It aligns with his heart, things that break the heart of God. And here's another one. It's not selfish. It's not just promoting yourself or furthering your life or furthering yourself. You see, when God really puts a vision in your heart, it's going to be for others. It's going to be for the gospel. It's going to be for the furtherment of his kingdom. And that's exactly what we see here. There's no logical reason Nehemiah would have been brokenhearted for a place he'd never been. No logical reason. It was a God dream. It was a God vision. It was a God burden that was in his heart. About it was the Lord. In verse 6 through 7, and then verse 11, look what it says. Look down. He's praying to the Lord. Look down, Lord, and see me praying night and day for your people, Israel. I confess that we have sinned against you. Yes, even my own family and I have sinned. We have terribly sinned by not obeying the commands, decrees, and regulations that you gave us through your servant Moses. Please grant me success today by making the king favorable to me. Put into his heart to be kind to me. So obviously he had this plan concocting in his heart. He's gonna, at some point when the time is right, he's gonna speak to the king. But the first thing that he did, he didn't go directly to the king, he went to the Lord. And he asked for favor. And not only that, he didn't just say, oh, Lord, help me fix all this broken stuff. And God, I think I'm the man for the job. You know, that wasn't what we see, a humility here. You know, that we have sinned. My family has sinned. I have sinned. He's making himself a part, both, he acknowledges he's a part of the problem, and he's humbling himself and saying, God, let me be a part of the solution as well. And so this is always our first step, to pray first. And let me just give you a little bit of pastoral counsel about this. Sometimes when you pray, it's like, man, God answers that prayer immediately, and he gives you a plan, and he gives you steps, and those steps start to just fall into place, and bada bing, bada boom, and things are happening, right? And it's an amazing thing when God moves quickly like that. But in my experience, God shows me the next step. And then he shows me another step. And maybe that first step of praying first, of petitioning God, sometimes that lasts for months. Sometimes it lasts for years. Sometimes God puts a vision in your heart that doesn't really come to fruition for a decade. And so if your timeline doesn't match Nehemiah's timeline, don't get discouraged. Keep taking your burden to the Lord and having this kind of heart. God, I'm here. I'm seeking you day and night. I know that, man, we've sinned, but God, help me be a part of the solution and give me favor. And then number 3, he petitions man. He petitions the king. In Nehemiah 2, 3 through 5, it says, long live the king. And just for some context, the king had noticed that Nehemiah's countenance had changed. He noticed that there was a heaviness about him, that he was sad. And so the king asked him, what's going on with you? What's up with you? You've changed. What's going on? Tell me. And so he says, long live the king. How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. The king asked, well, how can I help you? With a prayer to the God of heaven, I replied. Once again, he's praying first, even in the moment. He's depending on the Holy Spirit. If it please the king, and if you are pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried. He makes the big ask, right? I love it. Another thing I want to point out, and is if you go read the story, and I hope you will this week in its entirety, you'll see that he was ready. He had a plan. He didn't just have one request. He was ready with more requests. He wasn't just asking for permission to go. He asked for everything that he needed to complete the journey. And he knew exactly what he was going to need to complete the job. Listen, when you're going to petition man, when there's a person in leadership that is, you're going to need to go through that person to accomplish the will of God for your life and the plan and the vision that God has put in your life. I want to encourage you to come with a plan. You know, think about it. Why do you think banks want you to have a business plan when you come and ask for a business loan? because they want to know that you've thought about this and this isn't just a whim. Think about Shark Tank. When those people go on and they do their pitch and man, how many of you love that show? It's literally one of my favorites. It is so fun to watch. But what do the sharks want to know? Do you know your numbers? Do you know the processes? Can they trust that you're going to be a person that can actually get the job done? And so when Nehemiah went to the king, he had obviously thought through all of these details and he knew his stuff. I listened to a story the other day of a leader who at a very young age, in his late 20s, was entrusted to be the CEO of a large corporation that had like 500 million of revenue each year. And so for some reason, the former CEO of the company just really trusted this kid, right? And handed over the reins. And so right after he gets it goes public that he's going to be the CEO of this company, he goes on Christmas break. But instead of just going on Christmas break and having fun and doing all these things, he realized, he needed a lot of information to be able to fulfill this new role. And so he goes on the websites of a bunch of different universities and finds syllabuses for MBA programs, all having to do with finance, because he didn't know anything about finance. Can you imagine you're going to be the CEO of a company that has that kind of revenue and you don't know squat about how to talk in that realm? And so he goes and looks at the syllabuses, looks at what books that there are going to be in those classes. He orders all the books for himself and reads them all over Christmas break, just so he could go back to work, meet with the finance guy, and sound like he knew what he was talking about. And in sharing the story, he said that was so far out of his desire, so far out of his comfort zone, so far out of something that he wanted to do on Christmas break, but he knew that, especially given his age and given, how people would see him, he knew he needed to come in ready. When he was going to go work with people, he needed to put in the work himself. He didn't want to. It wasn't fun. He talks about in the story that this was like total just a drag of a Christmas break, right? But he had to put the work in. One of the biggest lies in our culture today is just if you don't like it, then it must not be for you. If you don't love every single minute of your job, then you should go find another job. Or, you just need to follow your heart, because God would never call you to do something that you don't like doing. What? That's not even how life works. And so I just want to encourage you today, just because things are hard, don't run from them. Now, sometimes we find ourselves in a place where God's grace just isn't on us for a certain season, and hey, we need to do something else, and I get that. But when God does call you to do something, do not be surprised if you need to put some work in doing things that you don't like to do. Because there's always a cost. There's always a cost to following Jesus. And so, remember, Nehemiah was a cupbearer. He bore the cup. He wasn't a builder. He wasn't a leader. He wasn't an organizer, administrator. He was a cupbearer. So dude had to learn some stuff if he was going to petition man and work with men to be a leader. Number 4, the fourth thing we see in this story is that king gives him all these supplies. He goes to Jerusalem and he begins to organize people. Now, look at how he did it, because he didn't just waltz in and be like, I'm the leader, I have this edict from the king, and I'm going to rebuild the wall. No. What does it say? In chapter 2, verse 16, it says, the city officials did not know I had been out there or what I was doing. What was he doing? He was walking around the walls. He was assessing the situation. He said, for I had not yet said anything to anyone about my plans. So he didn't rush into it. He was being smart. I had not yet spoken to the Jewish leaders, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or anyone else in the administration. But now I said to them, you know very well what trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire. Let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and end this disgrace. Then I told him about how the gracious hand of God had been on me and about my conversation with the king. They replied at once, "Yes, let's rebuild the wall." So they began the good work. Amazing. Amazing. Think about it. All these leaders were already on site and had not done anything. Nehemiah, the cupbearer, comes in, and because he approaches it the right way, and because he casts a strong vision, and because God's favor was on him, all of a sudden they're like, let's go. Let's do this. It's amazing. And so he organized people. He worked with the leaders that were already in place. He divvied up the people. They took their positions around the wall, and they began the work. You know, I've heard a lot of pastors say over the years that, and not just pastors, but leaders across all kinds of disciplines and in the marketplace, say things like, if it weren't for the people, this job would be easy. And I would echo that on some days, that sometimes it's like, man, if I could just do my thing, if I could just do my work and not worry about people, you know, it would be easy. But that is such a lame mindset when it comes to doing God's work, because God's work is all about people. You can't separate the two. For God so loved the world. When he says world, he's not talking about the dirt and all that. No, he's talking about the people in it. He didn't come and die for a dying planet. He came and died for spiritually dying people. And so if you're going to fulfill and pursue God's vision for your life, it's going to include people. All the introverts in the room, I know you just want to crawl in a shell and crawl under a hole, but even you, guess what? You're going to have to interact with some people at some point, in some way. And so he organized people. Number 5, the 5th thing that we see in the story is that he dealt with opposition. They began building, and as soon as they began building, all of a sudden enemies around, probably a lot of the people that had torn down the walls and set the city on fire, they were not happy, right? They were not happy. And so the enemies were going to attack. And so there's this really cool part in the story where Nehemiah tells the people, hey, stand and fight for your families. And they've got tools in one hand and they got swords in the other. And all the workers had swords strapped to themselves. And there was at one point where half of the men would work and the other half would stand guard at the same time. And it was like they were working and defending and fighting all at the same time. And so they dealt with constant opposition. And then Nehemiah, the leader himself, had to deal with opposition. Look at what it says in chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies found out that I had finished rebuilding the wall and that no gaps remained, though we had not yet set up the doors and the gates. So Sanballat and Geshem sent a message asking me to meet them at one of the villages in the plain of Ono. Now, let's just stop right there. If your enemies are asking you to go to a town called Ono, then, oh no, you don't go, right? I mean, that's just a dead giveaway. And no, there's nothing theological or scripture, about that. So, oh no. But I realized that they were plotting to harm me. So I replied by sending this message to them. I am engaged in a great work, so I can't come. Why should I stop working to come and meet with you? And I just love the boldness. Because every single one of us, we're going to get criticism, we're going to get pushback, we're going to get all kinds of different things said about our work whenever you try to do anything for the Lord. Whenever you try to do anything good, you might say, I'm trying to fix things, I'm trying to help, and all y'all are just mad at me. Has anybody ever been there in any area of your life? You're trying to help, you're trying to do the right thing, but people are trying to take you down. And Nehemiah just had this attitude that he saw through it, And I don't know if it was gut or intuition or somebody told him. We don't know. But he just said flatly, I can't come. Sorry. He didn't even entertain the meeting. And sometimes we just need to know, like, this is bogus. You know, I've heard people say, well, in every bit of criticism, there's a little bit of truth, or every little sarcasm, there's a little nugget. You know, sometimes there's not. Sometimes people really do just want the worst for you, and they want to take down what you're doing. And so sometimes you just need to have the discernment to say, no, I'm not going to have that meeting. No, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm doing a great work, and I can't come down. Now, when somebody has criticism for you and they love Jesus and they're wise and they've got your best intentions in mind, you need to listen. You need to entertain that. But sometimes opposition is just pure evil, and it does not have your best interest in mind. And you don't have to have that meeting, and you don't have to say yes, because it's just straight up trying to distract you. But there can be so many things that stand in opposition to what God wants to do in your life, and you're going to deal with every single one of them. You know, for instance, the first kind of opposition that we face is just our own personal lack of readiness, our own personal lack of self-leadership. Man, because if the devil can keep you from leading yourself, then he's got you stopped before you ever even get out of the blocks. Your blind spots. Maybe you have an aversion to discomfort. And getting out of your comfort zone, man, you'd rather do anything than get uncomfortable. And that's the first step of opposition that the enemy is bringing towards you, and it's already stopped you. Or maybe the opposition that you're facing is just distraction or a lack of understanding, and you're not willing to figure it out. Maybe there's good things in your life distracting you from the best things, and that's a form of opposition. Maybe there's direct opposition. There's actually people in your life that don't want what you're trying to do to happen, right? And you just got to call that for what it is. Like, these people are out for me, right? Sometimes there's spiritual forces in the unseen places, not flesh and blood. The New Testament talks that man, this is the primary form of spiritual warfare that we face, that when you step out to do something for the Lord, you are going to face spiritual warfare. And it's not flesh and blood, it's not people, it's just, you know, there's unseen things that are working against you to keep God's work from going forward. And so, if I could just wrap this whole point up by saying this: when you serve Jesus, when God puts a vision in your heart and you try to see that through, don't be surprised when you face opposition. Be surprised when you don't. Because Jesus said it was going to happen. Plainly. You're going to be persecuted. You're going to get pushed back. Everything isn't going to go your way. It's going to happen. But Nehemiah pushed through it, and he kept his eyes focused on the work. Number 6. Guess what? They completed the project, and they did it with flying colors. And in chapter 6, verse 15 through 16, look what it says. So on October 2nd, the wall was finished. Just 52 days after we had begun. When our enemies and the surrounding nations heard about it, they were frightened and humiliated. They realized this work had been done with the help of our God. Now, I'm no builder, but how many of you know how long these road construction projects take? Lord, help us all. It's like, this bridge will be done in 2028. And for the next 3 years, you're going to drive around this detour. And anybody get frustrated about stuff like that? And it's like, if they would just go and actually work, you know, then maybe this road project would get done. If you're a road worker, hey, I love you. But hey, we're watching, and we know, and I know you're not the boss. But if you are the boss, come on, let's get this thing done. And so, I'm just messing. But obviously, Nehemiah's crews, man, they were working around the clock and getting these things done. 52 days, it's amazing. And everyone loves to see a job completed. Everyone loves it. It's worth celebrating, and they did celebrate. But we, especially as Americans in our culture, we love to accomplish things. We love to build things. And most people, when they tell the story of Nehemiah, this is where they stop. This is where they stop. And Nehemiah was an amazing leader. And man, everybody was happy that the wall was done. And everyone here loves a completed project. But the thing I want you to see is that it didn't stop there. So much of the teaching that I've seen over the years about Nehemiah stops right there. But Nehemiah was bigger than the project. Nehemiah was bigger than the accomplishment. And if you just live for the completion of the project, or if you just live for the completion of the accomplishment, then when it's over, you're going to feel just as empty as you did before you started. And so, obviously, there was a bigger picture. Remember, the accomplishment is cool, but a lifetime serving Jesus is everything. And so look what happens. In number 7, the 7th thing we see, Nehemiah began to try to lead the people to live righteous lives. Man, you think building a wall is hard. Leading people to live righteous lives and keep their eyes on Jesus might be one of the hardest things ever. But he repopulates the city. He organizes the people once again. He gets Ezra, the priest, to come in. And look what it says in Nehemiah 8:2. It says, so on October 8th, Ezra the priest brought the book of the law before the assembly, which included the men and women and all the children old enough to understand it. He faced the square just inside the water gate from early morning until noon, and read aloud to everyone who could understand. All the people listened closely to the book of the law. As a pastor, I just love that, because how many of you know that I probably love it when I look across this crowd and I can tell everybody's listening, right? You know, most Sundays when I look around the room, I'll see some people falling asleep here and there, you know, and it's okay, you know, because guess what? I've fallen asleep in church before, so no stones thrown. It happens. You know, maybe you had a tough week. You know, maybe you need to get some coffee and dump it over your head. Hey, it's okay. You know, we'll clean the chair. But whatever you got to do. But you know, I bet Ezra loved it that he's reading the book of the law and everybody's paying attention and listening closely. But you know what this shows us? That building the wall wasn't the finish line. It was the beginning. It was the beginning, that God wanted to do more through Nehemiah than just complete a project. And so they had festivals and celebrations, and they made commitments to the Lord. They confessed their sins publicly even. They fasted and they prayed together. And then in Nehemiah 10:29 it says, they swore a curse on themselves if they failed to obey the law of God as issued by his servant Moses. They solemnly promised to carefully follow all the commands, regulations, and decrees of the Lord our God. How cool is that? They're so fired up to serve God. They're so fired up to do what God says. If you're Nehemiah, you're like, yes, it's happening. It's happening, right? We're leading people to live righteous lives. Not only did we create a place for them to get close to Jesus, but they're actually going for Jesus. You know, this building is a tool, and I love it. Don't we have an amazing building that God has blessed us with? Thank the Lord. Yeah, and so many people were generous, and so many people worked hard to put this building together, and I'm so thankful. But you know what? If we just have a building and nobody's searching for Jesus inside of it, man, we missed the boat. We missed the boat. And so that's exactly what's happening here. See, we're not only here to build buildings and do programs, we're here to seek Jesus and make commitments to him. But then as we close today, look what happens. The 8th thing we see. The 8th thing we see. And how many of you, when you looked at the notes today, you're like, 8 points. We're not going to get out of here till 2 o'clock. Well, hey, we're wrapping up. Last point. Here we go. Number 8. Nehemiah's story didn't really end with this nice, neat, and little tidy bow. He ended not only still working, but it doesn't even end on a high note. Look at what it says in Nehemiah 13:15. In those days, so this was after all the celebrations, after all the commitments, after all the people were like, I'm so fired up about the Lord, I'm going to serve him no matter what. And if I don't serve him and if I don't keep his commands, let me be cursed. So after that, it says, in those days I saw men of Judah treading out their wine presses on the Sabbath. Now, if you're new, you might say, well, what's the big deal about that? One of the most basic laws that God had given them was do not work on the Sabbath day. And yet, not too long after they made these huge commitments, they're going back on their word and doing exactly what they said they would not do, which is exactly what got the walls torn down in the first place. So they were also bringing in grain, loading it on donkeys, bringing their wine, grapes, figs, and all sorts of produce to Jerusalem to sell it on the Sabbath. So I rebuked them for selling their produce on that day. This just blows my mind. He accomplishes these great things. They lead people to live lives of righteousness, and then just like you and me, there begins this slow fade back into the old life. Have you ever experienced that? You had this love for Jesus, and then there's this slow fade back into your old rhythms. And so Nehemiah's running into issues, and he's having to address those issues, which I'm sure was not comfortable. And they're the same issues that you and I have now: consistency, devotion, and it's hard to keep all those things on track all the time. And that's why this church and the family of God and someone speaking into your life, just like Nehemiah was speaking into their life, is so important. That we need somebody saying, hey, what are you doing? Let's get back on track. Let's stop doing that, because remember your commitment to serve Jesus. And so that's why we do life groups, and that's why we have this place, so that we can help each other get on track, stay on track, and keep serving Jesus. Keep serving Jesus. Nehemiah, he could have just been like, I did my job. I built the wall. Now, God, these people are your problem. Right? A lot of us, that's the attitude we would have had. I did my job. But no, he didn't see the wall as just his one big accomplishment. He said, God put me here to do a good work, and it's going to go on until the day that I die. And the same God that put that vision in my heart back then is the one that's going to help me lead in the here and now. And so listen, maybe you're in a place where God did something in your life a long time ago, and now you just feel stagnant and stuck, and you've lost the vision, you've lost the spark. Maybe you got tired of working with people. Maybe you're like, I do the work and people let me down all the time and they don't follow through, and it's just easier to kind of sit in the background. I hope Nehemiah's story encourages you today. I hope it does, that just because you're in a different season of life doesn't make the work of God in you any less important. I was listening to a pastor on a podcast a couple weeks ago, and he's a pastor in the he's retired now, and so he's kind of in those end years of life, and he talked very openly about how there gets to a point in your ministry life when the phone stops ringing, when people stop seeking out your counsel. But he said something that was incredible, and I just loved it so much. He said, you know what? Things aren't like they used to be. I'm not leading the church anymore, and I'm not doing all the things I used to do anymore. But you know what? He said, there is no barrier to me joyfully serving the Lord today. There is no barrier to me joyfully serving the Lord today. And that's something I think we need to take from the story of Nehemiah, that even after you accomplish things, and even after, things go well, you might have some celebrations, there's going to be hard times too. And you're going to have to choose to serve the Lord even when people aren't listening, even when people are stuck, even when people are just around you are just going off the rails. There's no barrier. no matter what season of life that you're in. So don't get married to a season. Don't get married to a job. Don't get married to a title. Don't get married to your old accomplishments. We're going to carry different titles at different times in our life, but our core identity does not change. We're set apart to do what God has put in our hearts in every season, because this life is not the end. We see Paul tell us in the New Testament, he said, man, whether I live or whether I die, it's all about Jesus. He said, to live is Christ and to die is gain. But if I live, if I'm still here, if I'm still breathing, I can do more fruitful work for Christ. And obviously that is the same attitude we see in Nehemiah. That just because he got the job done, his work wasn't done, and he still had things to do. And so what's God putting in your heart? What vision is God birthing inside of you? And you might say, nothing. Well, hey, it's time to start praying. It's time to start looking through the eyes of the Holy Spirit in your workplace, in your school, in your life. God, what do you want to break my heart for? What kind of job are you going to give me? And then you pursue it with the same kind of fervor that Nehemiah pursued his.